The announcement lasted less than 2 minutes, yet its impact tore through the royal household like a warning bell. Princess Anne stood before the Crown Foundation's senior trustees, placed a signed directive on the table, and declared that Queen Camilla would no longer attend, represent, host, or influence any event connected to the organization. There was no hesitation, no private compromise, and when Camilla heard exactly what had been said, her expression revealed that she had never expected Anne to go this far. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne held her ground as the recorded briefing continued inside St. James's Palace. The Crown Foundation, a charitable body representing royal service, had become a clear sign of influence and trust. Exclusion from its receptions, donor dinners, youth programs, and regional visits meant more than a lighter diary. It told the country that Camilla's authority and place were being openly questioned in public with cold, unmistakable force. Camilla read the printed announcement twice at Clarence House. She tightened her hand around the page, then asked her private secretary whether Charles had approved it. The silence carried its own answer. She lowered the document and said, "So she chose to humiliate me before the entire country." The Queen Consort had spent years serving the crown, and now one decision threatened to make that progress look fragile. Anne faced a different pressure. A senior aide asked whether the recording should be delayed, but the princess closed the folder and refused. She said a decision made for public trust could not be hidden behind palace courtesy. The directive did not describe Camilla as temporarily unavailable or under review. It declared her attendance incompatible with the Foundation's renewed standards of independent royal service. That phrase did not sound administrative. It sounded like judgment. Charles was nowhere beside his sister when the order was announced. His absence deepened the mystery. Had the king approved the exclusion, resisted it in private, or learned too late that Anne had already secured enough support to act without him? Camilla wanted that answer. She rejected an immediate public statement. Instead, the monarch sent Anne a request for a private meeting before sunset. The message was recorded by her secretary and delivered through the palace office without alteration. It contained only one sentence: "You will explain this to my face." But before those two women could confront each other, the palace had to face the deeper truth that this was not merely a disagreement over charity work, but a battle over who still belonged at the center of the crown. To the public, they had stood on the same balconies, attended the same services, and bowed their heads during the same solemn ceremonies. Behind those carefully controlled appearances, however, Princess Anne and Camilla had never viewed royal service in the same way. One believed duty demanded sacrifice without reward. The other had fought for decades to be accepted inside an institution that once rejected her. Now, with one public decision, their separate histories had collided, and neither woman could retreat without losing something deeply personal. Anne had built her life around work that rarely asked for applause. She believed royal responsibility meant showing up, enduring criticism, and refusing to use rank as protection from hard choices. The Crown Foundation, a charitable organization linking royal figures with public causes, had become her test of whether the monarchy still served people before itself. Camilla saw the same institution differently. Every reception and patronage had helped prove she belonged. Losing them threatened the acceptance she had spent years earning. Charles sat behind his desk with Anne's directive in one hand and Camilla's handwritten note in the other. He removed his glasses, pressed his fingers against his forehead, and admitted to an aide that whichever woman he defended would believe he had betrayed the other. The king understood why the decision mattered. Supporting his sister could wound his marriage. Protecting his wife could make public duty look like private favor. Anne heard that Camilla considered the announcement cruel, but she refused to apologize. She told her secretary that personal pain could not outweigh public confidence. Yet when the room fell quiet, the princess remained still for several seconds, staring at the closed folder as though it carried more than policy. She had acted firmly, but the cost was beginning to reach her. William had already read the directive before its release. The prince studied every line, corrected one sentence about governance, the rules controlling how an institution makes decisions, and returned the document without revealing his position. His silence unsettled Charles, because support from the future king could turn Anne's challenge into something larger than a family dispute. Camilla finally spoke to her sister during a private telephone conversation recorded in the household diary. She confessed that she did not fear missing dinners. She feared Anne was testing whether royal life could continue without her. At that same hour, one trustee requested the sealed minutes, the confidential written record, from a Windsor gathering held 3 months earlier. Inside them rested a demand Camilla had made, and Anne had never forgiven. And inside those sealed minutes was the moment everyone would later identify as the point when disagreement hardened into an irreversible decision. The crisis had not begun with Anne's announcement. It began 3 months earlier, beneath the polished formality of a private Crown Foundation donor dinner at Windsor. What should have been a routine evening of speeches and pledges became the scene of a confrontation so sharp that senior trustees were ordered to record every word. Camilla wanted the foundation reshaped around the Queen's office. Anne believed that demand crossed a line. By midnight, the two women were no longer debating procedure. They were fighting over the soul of royal service. Camilla waited until the pledge before placing her proposal before the room. She wanted every foundation event approved through her household, with herself installed as permanent ceremonial chair. That title meant the royal figure who would lead the organization's events, speeches, and appearances. Under her plan, the Queen's office would control guest lists, regional visits, donor messages, and patronage announcements. To her, it promised order. To the trustees, it threatened independence. Anne set her unused speech beside her plate and asked the question no one else dared to voice. Did Camilla want to serve the foundation or possess it? The Queen answered that she wanted stability after months of confusion. The princess replied that stability could not be built by removing every other royal voice. The silence was entered into the documented meeting record, the formal written account of what was said, because every trustee understood the danger. The foundation served several royal households. Handing it to one would turn public charity into private influence. Charles watched the exchange tighten, but refused to settle it. He asked both women to continue privately, believing delay might cool the anger. Camilla heard permission. Anne heard surrender. The king's silence mattered, because his support could have stopped the proposal, while his hesitation left his sister convinced that someone else had to protect the boundary. Camilla then said the organization needed one recognized female authority beside the sovereign. Anne asked whether Catherine, Sophie, and the other working royals would answer to her. She received no clear reply. That absence changed everything. Anne acted before dawn. In a confidential note delivered to the trustees, she ordered a review of Camilla's involvement and warned that charitable visibility must never become personal control. Weeks later, the Queen opened the wrong red dispatch box in Charles's study, a locked case used to carry official papers, and found the signed request. She said nothing. Instead, she began seeking support among courtiers. By the time Camilla finally entered the room with Anne, both women already knew the argument was no longer about what had happened at Windsor. It was about who possessed the courage to force the other one back. The door closed. The aides remained outside, and for several seconds, neither woman spoke. Camilla stood near the fireplace holding the exclusion order. Anne remained beside the long table, refusing to offer tea, comfort, or ceremony. Then the Queen placed the document between them and demanded to know who had given the princess the right to remove her publicly. Anne did not raise her voice. Her answer was colder than anger. The responsibility you tried to take gave me that right. Camilla kept one hand on the order as though letting go would mean accepting it. She insisted the announcement be withdrawn and replaced with language describing a temporary reorganization. The exclusion order was the formal document removing her from foundation duties, and its wording carried public force. She argued that humiliation of the Queen weakened Charles, damaged the monarchy, and turned an internal dispute into a national spectacle. Anne refused to soften the blow. She said the damage began at Windsor, when Camilla tried to place a shared institution under one household's control. The princess warned that reversing the directive would tell every trustee that royal pressure mattered more than governance, the rules deciding how an organization is controlled. To her, that would destroy trust faster than any headline. Camilla's anger suddenly cracked. She accused Anne of never accepting her, even after years beside Charles and countless duties performed without complaint. Her voice broke as she asked whether this was truly about the foundation or whether the princess had waited for the perfect moment to remind her that she had entered the family beneath a permanent shadow. The queen consort wanted an honest answer, and Anne gave one. Anne admitted she had not forgotten the past, yet she said Diana, public anger, and old resentment had not written the order. Camilla's own proposal had done that. The trusted royal told her that closeness to the king was not ownership of the crown, and love could not convert shared service into personal authority. The words landed harder than accusation, because they named the fear Camilla had tried to hide in that room. Then Anne disclosed what Charles had concealed. The king had known trustees were reviewing his wife's role, though he had not seen the final language. He could have challenged the process earlier. He chose not to. Camilla folded the document once and said he would now be forced to choose. Anne answered that his choice might no longer change anything, because while the confrontation exposed the pain between two women, the true force behind the exclusion was already moving through the monarchy's governing structure, and even the king could not simply command it to disappear. Camilla had expected Anne's opposition. What she had not expected was the number of people standing silently behind it. The foundation trustees had voted. William had reviewed the wording. Sophie had submitted concerns. Independent advisors had documented the Windsor dinner. Even Charles's private office had declined to challenge the process. The queen was not facing one determined princess. She was confronting a quiet coalition that believed her influence had grown too far, and at the center of that coalition stood a future king, choosing institution over family peace. Anne had not demanded obedience. She had presented records and the Windsor minutes to the Board of Independent Trustees, the group responsible for the foundation's decisions. Royal patrons could support its work, but they could not command it. That distinction mattered, because the charity's trust depended on decisions being made for service, not to satisfy one household. Her influence came from years of undeniable work. Trustees saw Anne as disciplined, predictable, and uninterested in personal glory. When the princess warned that the foundation's independence was at risk, they listened, because she had spent decades proving that duty meant limits, even for royals. William met her in a library before the final vote. He admitted that backing the restriction would wound Charles, yet allowing one household to dominate royal charities would create a precedent he might never reverse. The prince knew a precedent meant a decision future leaders could be expected to follow. Protecting family peace today could weaken his authority tomorrow. Charles confronted his son afterward. The king asked whether he understood what the directive would do to Camilla. William answered that he understood exactly. He also understood that one day his father would leave him an institution, not merely a family, and he could not protect both by pretending they were the same. Sophie's confidential statement deepened the damage. In a written account submitted to trustees, she described an earlier reception where Camilla's staff tried to remove another royal patron from the speaking program. The trusted confidant did not accuse the queen of cruelty, but she documented a pattern that could no longer be dismissed as confusion. The vote ended all doubt. 7 trustees supported exclusion, 1 preferred a 6-month suspension, and none backed Camilla's role unchanged. Anne had not created the judgment alone. She had made it public. Then the first consequence officially arrived. Camilla's name disappeared from the program for a children's health reception, and Catherine was asked to replace her. And when the revised program reached Clarence's house, Camilla finally understood that the decision was not a warning designed to frighten her. It was a new reality already being carried out without her. The revised program arrived in a cream envelope that looked no different from 100 others. Camilla opened it expecting schedules, names, and ceremonial timings. Instead, she found the Crown Foundation reception listed beneath Catherine's name. Her own had vanished. No explanatory note, no private reassurance, just an empty space where her role had once been. For the first time since becoming queen, she saw how quickly royal machinery could move on without her, and how little noise it made while doing so. Camilla kept reading, though the meaning was already clear. 4 appearances had been reassigned: the children's health reception, an environmental grants ceremony, a donor luncheon, and a regional literacy visit. Each cancellation mattered because those events had proved her public usefulness, while their removal told staff, donors, and other royals that her authority no longer reached the foundation. Defeat now felt organized, visible, and impossible to deny. The machinery moved quickly. Briefing papers stopped arriving. Staff assigned to her charity work were transferred, and her office lost access to the planning calendar, the shared schedule used to organize future events. Camilla removed the cancelled reception card from its silver holder and placed it face down. When her secretary offered to arrange another engagement, she answered, "No, I will not pretend I was somewhere else by choice." Catherine felt no triumph when the invitation reached her. She immediately asked whether Camilla had been told, then accepted, because the children and families could not be abandoned. Later, she told William that another woman's humiliation should never become a celebration. The prince agreed, yet both understood why the substitution mattered. If Catherine appeared and the event succeeded, the palace would prove that the foundation could continue without the queen consort. Charles almost fought back. He drafted a statement praising his wife's service and suggesting the decision would be reviewed. Before he could release it, advisors warned that several independent trustees might resign if the king appeared to overrule them. The monarch read the warning twice, then left the statement unsigned. Anne offered one narrow path back. In a handwritten message, she said Camilla could return only as a non-controlling patron, a royal supporter without power over decisions. If she recognized the board's independence and withdrew her claim to permanent ceremonial leadership. The queen returned the note unsigned. Across the bottom, she wrote, "You are asking me to return as a guest inside a role I helped build." Yet when the king finally entered the room to speak with his wife, he did not bring the defense she expected. He brought a truth that forced both of them to reconsider what they were trying to protect. For once, there were no aides waiting beyond the door, no briefing papers arranged between them, and no titles strong enough to soften what had happened. Charles sat opposite Camilla, in the fading quiet of Clarence House, and admitted that he had known Anne was reviewing her position. He had hoped the dispute would disappear before becoming public. It had not. Now his wife wanted him to overturn the decision, while his conscience warned that doing so might prove every criticism correct. The monarchy had entered their marriage. Charles removed the unsigned statement, but kept it folded in his hand. The draft was a public defense of Camilla's service, written to suggest that the foundation decision might be reviewed. He had brought it because silence was no longer protection. It had become proof that he had allowed the storm to reach her without warning. The king admitted that fear had guided him. He had avoided confronting the dispute because every argument about Camilla could reopen years of hostility around their relationship. He wanted to spare her another battle. Instead, his silence left the queen consort exposed to Anne's announcement and made his loyalty appear uncertain when she needed it most. Camilla asked the question he had dreaded. Did he believe she had abused her position? Charles answered that she wanted security, recognition, and a role no one could remove. Yet in trying to make those things permanent, she had demanded authority that belonged to neither of them. The crown, he said, could not become a shield for private fear. Her anger slowly gave way to grief. Camilla said she had spent years proving she could serve, only to watch one mistake turn her into an intruder again. She turned away, but Charles told her that accepting limits would not erase her work. Refusing those limits might allow the mistake to define it. Then the monarch unfolded the statement. Releasing it would place him against Anne, William, Sophie, and the independent trustees. Several could resign, creating a constitutional embarrassment, a public crisis over how royal power was being used. Camilla took the paper from his hand. After a long silence, she tore it in half and said she would not let him damage the crown merely to prove he loved her. She asked Anne for one final meeting, not to reverse the exclusion, but to decide how the monarchy would explain it without turning either woman into a permanent enemy. That choice did not restore Camilla's place in the foundation, but it changed the meaning of her defeat and prepared the palace for the moment when the country would judge whether the exclusion was justice, cruelty, or both. By morning, the royal dispute belonged to everyone. Broadcasters replayed Anne's announcement. Commentators examined Camilla's absence from the revised program. Newspapers turned private pain into enormous black headlines. Yet one photograph carried more force than any editorial. Catherine entering the Crown Foundation's children's reception, while an empty ceremonial chair remained beside the stage. To some, it represented necessary reform. To others, calculated humiliation. But inside the palace, Anne and Camilla were preparing a response that neither supporters nor critics expected. Catherine entered the children's health reception, knowing every movement would be judged. The Crown Foundation, a royal charity supporting public causes, had meant to place families at the center of the day. Instead, the empty ceremonial chair beside the stage threatened to turn Camilla's absence into the main event. Catherine paused, asked staff to remove it, and quietly reminded them that children should not become background figures in a royal quarrel. Public opinion split almost immediately. Some praised Anne for protecting charitable independence. Others argued that Camilla should have been corrected in private rather than stripped of every appearance before the country. Buckingham Palace confirmed that the board's decision would stand and called the changes a governance renewal, the formal process of improving how an organization is controlled. Charles issued no separate defense. His silence made clear that the king had accepted the outcome. For Camilla, that silence now carried a brutal meaning. Her husband would stand beside her personally, but he would not use the crown to rescue her publicly. Anne watched the coverage beside Sophie and heard one broadcaster call her the royal who publicly banished the queen. The princess tightened her jaw. She told the trusted confidant that she had acted to protect the foundation, not to turn necessary discipline into entertainment. Sophie answered that public decisions create public pain, even when the motive is duty. Outside St. James's Palace, the division became impossible to ignore. A crowd gathered beneath copies of a front-page reading, "Anne draws the crown line." One woman raised a sign supporting the princess. Another placed flowers near the gate with a card saying, "Service should not require humiliation." Camilla and Anne finally approved a joint declaration. The recorded statement confirmed that the exclusion would remain, the foundation's independence would be respected, and both women would continue serving through separate duties. Afterward, Camilla offered her hand. Anne hesitated, then accepted. The gesture did not restore trust, but it ended the hunger for revenge. And when the palace doors finally closed on the spectacle, what remained was not the question of who had won, but the clearer and more painful truth of what each woman had chosen to sacrifice. In the end, Princess Anne did not restore Camilla to the Crown Foundation, and Camilla did not receive the public apology she had demanded. The exclusion remained. The programs were rewritten. The authority she sought was permanently denied. Yet the final outcome was not the destruction of a queen or the triumph of a princess. It was a severe lesson delivered to the entire monarchy. Love may influence the people inside the crown, but it cannot be permitted to own the institutions that exist in its name. The decision became permanent. Trustees amended the foundation charter, the written rules that define how the organization is governed, so no royal household could ever take lasting control. Future ceremonial chairs would serve limited terms, major decisions would require independent approval, and every royal patron would hold the same non-executive position. That mattered because the foundation could now serve public causes without becoming an extension of one marriage, one office, or one personal ambition. Camilla accepted the result without pretending it did not hurt. Before her next engagement, she removed the foundation badge she had worn at receptions and placed it inside a drawer. The Queen paused, closed it gently, and walked away without asking anyone to reopen it. She would remain beside Charles, continue her duties, and serve the monarchy elsewhere. But this part of her royal life was over. Anne signed the revised charter without celebration. She told William that protecting an institution sometimes meant hurting someone she had never intended to destroy. The princess understood that victory without restraint could become cruelty. The future king answered that restraint was exactly what separated duty from vengeance, and his words left her silent. Charles then made his definitive choice. The king signed the governance amendment, accepting that his wife's wishes could not outrank the foundation's independence. Yet he later joined Camilla at another public engagement, proving that institutional limits did not require personal abandonment. He had refused to rescue her with royal power. but he had not withdrawn his love. Weeks later, Anne and Camilla stood beside one another at a memorial service. They exchanged a nod, neither warm nor hostile. Trust had been damaged. Boundaries had been fixed. Neither woman offered false reconciliation, yet both continued serving, and that endurance became the final answer. The exclusion changed Camilla's place within one royal institution, but it also established something larger and lasting. The crown could protect its future only when those closest to power accepted that service was never the same thing as control.